And now the conclusion of Exotic Matters. The aliens just retreated, Captain. Not sure why. We're bringing the last batch of falling stars over now. Very good, Mr. Perel. Be careful. Jour terminated the link and hunched forward in his chair. The boarding party had brought back an abundance of falling stars after their first visit to the freighter, while managing to avoid a confrontation with the aliens. Yet, that hadn't been enough for Jour. He had ordered them back to claim the rest of her cargo, and now Lorden was dead, along with 3 others. Ved and Inella had vanished through the rift and were not responding to hails. For all Jour knew, they were dead too. 3 crates of falling stars paid for with the lives of 4, possibly 6, good people, including his best friend. It was a Pyrrhic victory, and Jour had only his own avarice to blame. But if anyone could find a way back, it's Ankar. Loresto, how much time before the rift closes? 2 hours, 49 minutes, but we don't have that long. 3 system police cruisers just dropped out of a wormhole. They're closing in on our position and should be in firing range within 12 minutes. How long before the final team is aboard? About 10 minutes. Jour shifted his gaze to the freighter on the main screen. A better trap than any the system could have devised. Orders, sir? Keep trying to raise Mr. Ved. Two of the aliens, their helmets removed, greeted them as they exited the airlock into a small anteroom. Ved's hand hovered over his leg holster, fingertips brushing the grip of his blaster, before noticing that their hosts were unarmed. Perhaps this was to prove their peaceful intentions. Nevertheless, even without weapons, the creatures were a fearsome presence. Their narrow, angular heads were hairless and covered in taut skin of mauve, mottled with patches of rust. While their ears were smaller than those of humans, Ved found himself unsettled by their dull, round eyes of black, set widely apart above a practically non-existent nose. Protruding jaws filled with serrated teeth completed the look of beings that might have evolved from a species of ocean predator. The alien closest to Inella pointed to her helmet, then placed its hands on either side of its head and raised them. I think it wants us to take off our helmets. Ved peered at his wristpad and pressed a few buttons. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. The air is breathable. He and Inella removed their gloves and helmets. One of the aliens uttered a phrase that sounded like Ze Num Barash and motioned for the visitors to follow. Ved waited until they had lumbered a few meters down the corridor before starting after them. Inella lagged a few paces behind and either ignored or was oblivious to Ved's furtive glances. Her pursed lips and solemn gaze prompted him to ask if she was all right. I don't know yet. You're wondering if your brother is... Yes. If only there was a way to ask these creatures. The aliens led them into a control room that Ved surmised was part of the ship's engineering section. It was abuzz with activity, both alien and human. Their escorts approached one of the men and a brief conversation ensued. He replied in their tongue. Finally, the behemoths parted and Inella gasped at the sight of him. Ganek! My God! The man stepped out from between the aliens and rushed toward her. He was slightly taller than Ved, and his youthful face was covered in graying stubble. Inella, what are you doing here? He swept her into a tight embrace. I never thought I'd see you again. And we thought you were dead. I didn't recognize your voice earlier. Are you okay? You sound ill. I'm fine. It's just fatigue. Ganek pulled back, but maintained a gentle grip on her shoulders. Look at you. Our little sister's a woman now. She wiped tears from her face. And a newly minted doctor of astrophysics. You followed your dreams. I knew you would. Mom and Dad must be proud. How are they? Inella shook her head. Dad died of a massive stroke after he learned about the explosion. Mom followed 8 months later. She went peacefully in her sleep. Ganek closed his eyes for a moment. The Merapi's final victims. And since we had no other family, you were left all alone. I got through it. Speaking of family, Inella glanced around the control room. Where's Manara? She didn't survive the explosion. I didn't even realize it until we passed through the rift. We were separated. I was working in sickbay. She was down here in engineering. There was so much chaos. It was hours before we knew how many we'd lost to the vacuum of space. Minara was among them. So, in a way, I too was left alone. I'm so sorry, but we're together again. You can come back with me through the rift. You can come home. Yes, it seems fate has reunited us. But if all goes as planned, I won't be the only one crossing the rift. What do you mean? Ved asked. Anella's shoulders slumped. I'm so sorry. Gannick, this is my friend Ankar. Her brother extended a hand. You two work together? Actually, we just met today, Ved replied. It's a long story. Well, you have my sincerest apologies for the armed conflict aboard the freighter. Our only intention was to take a few crates of falling stars. For what purpose? That too is a long story, and we haven't much time. Gannick nodded toward the aliens. These people are called the Irazai. A few days after the Merapi drifted across the rift, 4 of their ships intercepted us. We thought they were going to attack. Instead, they offered aid, although it took several hours for us to interpret their intentions. They helped us repair the ship and invited us to live on one of their colonies. We became fast friends. Despite your first encounter with their soldiers, most of the Irazai are gentle giants. About 2 years ago, a race known as the Kuvengi attacked and destroyed a number of Irazai military bases before invading their homeworld. It was nearly a massacre. This fleet carries the last of their race, and the Kuvengi are still hunting them. If we successfully cross the rift, not only can the surviving crew of the Merapi finally go home, but the Irazai stand a better chance of finding a new world where they can be safe and rebuild their race. The Kuvengi will be none the wiser. Our only concern is the system. Are they still the same xenophobic monsters they were years ago? Worse, Ved replied. But we know of a few colonies beyond the system's jurisdiction that might be willing to provide safe harbor to refugees. The question is, how do you plan to bring this entire fleet through such a small rift? By expanding it, Gannick grinned. When the freighter in your universe exploded and opened the rift, our fleet detected the burst of exotic matter. We then agreed to sacrifice what was left of the Merapi. This old hulk's propulsion system is being wired up like a bomb using all the falling stars we took from the freighter. As soon as our engines fire, every falling star will detonate. We calculate that the rift will expand at least tenfold, more than sufficient to permit our fleet to slip through into your universe. How long before detonation? Ved asked. Gannick was about to reply when a crew member approached and informed him that the last falling star was in place and the timer set. Excellent. Alert all hands to evacuate. Once they've returned to their ships, order the fleet to the prearranged coordinates. The woman hurried off, and Gannick motioned for Ved and Anella to precede him. I'll escort you to the airlock. What if something happens and the fleet doesn't make it through? Anella took his hand. Come back with me through the rift now. I don't want to lose you again. You won't, I promise. After all these years with the Irazai, I want to take this final step with them. Once we're all through, you and I will have the rest of our lives to catch up and be a family again. Gannick kissed her on the forehead. Be safe. And remember, he turned to Ved, when you return to your ship, move it at least 700 kilometers from the rift. In less than 20 standard minutes, there's going to be one hell of a light show. It's been a long time, Balaam. Less than 2 meters in front of Jor's command chair towered the undulating hologram of Captain Valaya Rolk of the System Police. Her thin lips smirked down at him, hands clasped behind her narrow back, feet slightly apart. Not long enough. To what do I owe the pleasure, Valaya? Oh, believe me, the pleasure of arresting you is all mine. On what charge? Theft of food, drugs, and other goods from Tamor Base, which apparently wasn't enough for you. Now I see you've attacked one of our freighters. You disappoint me, Balaam, resorting to piracy. I didn't think you had it in you. We stole nothing from Tamor Base, nor did we attack the freighter. It suffered catastrophic engine failure long before we came along. Surrender your vessel and prepare to be boarded. You've taken everything else from me, honey. You ain't getting my ship. Be smart about this, Balaam. I'm the law out here. You can't escape. You're surrounded and I outgun you 3-1. As usual when it comes to the two of us, I have the upper hand. For the sake of your crew, let's do this peacefully. Or what? You'll kill us? Jor leaned forward in his seat. I don't think you have it in you. Ved to stellar storm. Without diverting his gaze from Rook's dour visage, Jor pressed a button on the small touchscreen mounted on the arm of his command chair. Storm here. It's good to hear your voice, Ankar. Where have you been? Aboard the Merapi, or what's left of her. I'll fill you in later. Inella and I are returning to the storm. As soon as we're aboard, you need to take her out of here as quickly as possible. We might have a problem with that, Mr. Ved. Ved frowned. What do you mean? He means me, Ankar, a woman's voice chimed in. Wincing, Ved clenched his fists and mouthed a string of expletives before regaining his composure. Valaya, Captain Rook, what brings you out this way? I already explained that to Balaam. What's your status? Oh, I've never felt better, but you might want to move your ships at least 700 kilometers away from this freighter. Care to explain why? Who is this person? Inella whispered. System police. May I? Inella's hand hovered over her wrist pad. Ved shrugged and she pressed a button. Captain Rook, my name is Dr. Inella Strabe of the Ganzing Science Institute. To make a long story short, this freighter's propulsion system malfunctioned, causing its falling star units to explode. The sudden release of exotic matter tore a small rift in the fabric of space, an opening to another reality. I'm sure your sensors detect it. On the other side of this rift, a large vessel is rigged with hundreds of falling stars set to detonate in approximately 9 minutes. It will expand the rift by a factor of 10, permitting a fleet of over 20 ships to cross into our universe. As Mr. Ved advised, we should all move to a minimum safe distance of 700 kilometers immediately. And after that, Captain Rook, Ved added, we'll be more than happy to brief you on the details, if you'll first permit Dr. Strabe and me to return to our ship. He paused. Then, it is, after all, my home. Ved's curious phrase meant nothing to Valaya, but was a ray of hope to Jor. I read you, Mr. Ved. He tapped his touchscreen and gazed up at the hologram of Rook. With your permission, Captain. She drew herself to her full height. They are trespassing on system property. I want them off. I'll take that as a yes. Jor tapped the screen again. Ved, you're clear to jet over. Actually, my jetpack is almost depleted, but the thrusters on this freighter still function. Captain Rook, if you'll allow me, I'd like to pilot her to the storm and dock her at the starboard airlock. Then you can take possession. At a flash of movement in his peripheral vision, Jor's head snapped up. Rook turned to her left and thrust out a hand, signaling to someone on her bridge. The first torpedo slammed into the freighter's port side, sending it spinning deeper into the rift. The storm's bridge fell silent. All eyes tracked the second torpedo across the view screen as it struck the drone ship's engineering section. A moment later, debris was all that remained. The mild shockwave that nudged the storm could scarcely match the bridge crew's rage as they erupted in shouts and profanities, all directed at the hologram of Captain Rook. George shoved the touchscreen aside and leapt from his chair. You just murdered 2 of my crew. Mr. Ved and his companion were killed while attempting to steal system property. Unless you wish the same fate for you and your crew, surrender your ship and prepare to be Rook's hologram vanished in a blinding white flash. George shielded his eyes until the intensity faded. In his fury over Ved's death, he had forgotten about the rift and the time bomb that was the Merapi. That was a fast 9 minutes. Loresto, how long before the shockwave hits us? About 4 minutes. Plot a course to Exarces. Already in, sir. As he's proved time and again, Anchor always finds his way back. Jor tapped his screen. Storm to Ved, please respond. He paused, then, Anchor, are you there? Come in, damn it. Inella, do you read me? There was no reply. Loresto spoke up in a plaintive voice. I'm sorry, sir, but we need to leave. George slammed his fist into his touchscreen, cracking its surface. After a moment, he nodded to the helmsman. The young man's thin fingers danced over his console. The stellar storm dropped below the police cruisers and turned hard to starboard. The cruisers glided off the main view screen, but not before the shockwave struck the one closest to the rift, tossing it like flotsam and sending it careening out of control. The crew cheered as the spinning police cruiser collided with another, triggering a series of small explosions that left both vessels crippled. The scene shrank into the distance until it faded into the vastness of space. Goodbye, Valaya. Hopefully for the last time. Loresto, Engage particle drive. Take us to Exarces. The stellar storm glided above the outermost ring of the blue gas giant Zetavor, before touching down on the planet's largest moon. Exarces was one of 5 moons in this remote region of space that had been terraformed by the System Corps of Engineers for use as a colony, when many of the inner system worlds had become overpopulated. After only a few years, the cost of supporting the colonies had become prohibitive, and the system abruptly cut them off before they'd become self-sufficient. This meant hiring private contractors to help the colonies conduct trade with the inner worlds. Occasionally, these contractors resorted to questionable means in order to obtain scarce commodities that would be otherwise unaffordable due to exorbitant tariffs imposed by the system. Crates of such items were now being unloaded from the Stellar Storm's cargo hold, while Jor met with the colony's leader, Suneta. Captain Jor, you have the thanks of a grateful colony. Did you encounter any problems? Nothing we couldn't handle, although I lost several good men, including Ved and Lorden. In that case, you also have our condolences. Suneta bowed her head of wiry silver hair and waved a gnarled hand toward a collection of small white plasteel boxes stacked against the wall of her office. Your fee, as agreed. To further express our gratitude, you are welcome to dine with the council this evening, in honor of your fallen crewmen. That's most kind, ma'am. A yellow light flashed on Suneta's touchscreen at the edge of her desk. Go ahead, Raja. Ma'am, a fleet of over 20 ships has just dropped out of a wormhole on the other side of Zetavor. Jor leapt from his chair. Suneta held up a hand to calm him. System vessels? Negative. Unfamiliar class. They just launched a shuttle on a direct course for Exarces. Wait, they're hailing us. After a pause, the communications tech continued in a befuddled tone. It is a Mr. Ved calling for Captain Jor. The alien shuttle touched down in a clearing on the opposite side of the colony from the stellar storm. Ved, Inella, and Gannick stepped out of the hatch to find a greeting party consisting of Jor, Suneta, and a security contingent. Jor smiled at the sight of them. I should have known you'd find a way back when you used the code phrase. Ved spread his arms as he approached. It is, after all, my home. Jor embraced him and Inella together. Yeah, well, I lost my mind when I thought Valaya had killed you both. I tend to look before I leap. That's why I contacted you from the Merapi first, to be sure it was safe to return. The minute I heard Valaya's voice, there was no way we were going back to the freighter. That woman is ruthless. Why do you think I divorced her? Jor said. Inella held up her hands. Wait, what's this code you mentioned? Balaam and I came up with this odd phrase to use whenever a crew member becomes separated from the ship, but finds an alternate way to rendezvous with us at our next destination. Ved introduced Gannick to Jor and Suneta. Gannick represents a group of refugees who have been exiled from their world. I thought perhaps you could help. Suneta motioned for them to follow. Come with me. I shall arrange another place at the dinner table, and we can discuss the particulars. I look forward to hearing all about your escapade across the rift, Jor nodded toward the storm. But for now, I'm going to go check in with the crew. See you at dinner. As the captain sauntered off, Ved turned to Inella. I owe you an apology for calling you bad luck. Were it not for you and your brother, I might have been killed when Valaya turned up. She leaned into Ved and kissed him on the cheek. And thank you for saving my life on the freighter. I never would have found my brother again if we hadn't gone sailing through the rift. I guess you're not a typical pirate after all. So where to now? Inella shrugged. Wherever Gannick goes, I'll probably join him. He's the only family I have, and I can pursue astrophysics from anywhere in the cosmos. She nudged him with her elbow. It is, after all, my home.